All right, welcome to this new live episode of Swift Community. So I have with me as my guest this evening Josh Holtz. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. And we have a really exciting topic because we are going to talk about automating iOS app deployment. And of course, we're going to talk about Fastlane because after all, you are the lead maintainer of Fastlane.
This is correct. I'm excited about this.
And so, of course, this episode is live. So, the entire point of the live is that in the chat, if you have questions, well, you can ask them and we can answer them live. So, anything you want to add, any question you would like to ask, please say it in the chat and it will make this live even more interactive.
This will
Okay,
be fun.
so it's time for us to get into the meat of the topic. So after this short intro, I wanted us to get into your background to kind of know, well, who you are and what led you to today be Fastlane's maintainer.
All right. How far back do we want to go in the background?
I don't know, maybe like how you started doing iOS and then the moment that you started working with Fastlane, maybe?
All right, sounds good. So I started doing iOS development probably I think it was back in like end of 2010, beginning of 2011. I was ending college. I got interested into mobile development. I started doing Android development because I didn't have a Mac. But at the end of my senior year, I was able to get a hold of an 11-inch MacBook Air, which was my favorite computer by far so far. And I started doing some iOS development then. That was, I think it was iOS 4 when Arc was still a thing.
Yes.
So I was pretty, or oh, sorry, Arc was not a thing.
So retain release
So
all the
I
way.
was, yes, yeah. So I was pretty intimidated. But I think like a few months after I started, Arc was announced, and then iOS 5 and all that fun stuff. So things became a little bit easier. So like 2011, I was doing probably like half Android development, half iOS. But I really got serious about iOS probably in like 2014, 2015. So in 2011, I started a software consulting company with three of my schoolmates. And we did a lot of back-end dev, front-end web dev. I kind of did whatever projects came in. And then in like 2015 is when I was really focused on mobile, and I was doing a lot of release management, sending stuff to app stores, all that. And a lot of my job actually became just not doing development, just releasing apps and all of that stuff. I think I probably had like a total of like 10 across all platforms at one time, and it was just a lot. So then Felix created and the tool, and it was a life changer. I quickly jumped on and created some PRs. Became on the core contributor team in early 2015, and I haven't looked back since.
So I think I have some screenshot that you sent me. So of the tweet that I think this is how you got to know about Fastlane, right?
Yes, Orta tweeted about Felix starting to do some CLI tools in 2014, as that tweet mentioned. And I followed Orta quite a bit before then, as he was a maintainer in CocoaPods. So I trusted his expertise here. And then yeah, Felix shortly after then announced all of the tools, so like Snapshot, Scan, all the tools that are now incorporated in one. And I think the next screenshot that you'll show is my first PR,
Yes.
which was actually into Snapshot. And I think this was like the first time I ran Snapshot. I for some reason ran into some weird permissions with granting the simulator access or something like that. And I actually started doing Ruby back in 2008. So this was kind of like the right mixture of tools for me here, because it was mobile, which I had experience in. Ruby, I had about 5 years experience in. So jumping into here felt pretty normal. And I think I created a second PR shortly after this, and then Felix liked what I was doing and asked me to be on the core contributor team shortly after.
So yeah, so thank you for this background. It's super interesting because we've given hints of parts that we are going to cover later in the episode. So about what's Fastlane, how can people contribute. So great introduction. And so now we can focus a little bit more on Fastlane
Yes.
itself. So Fastlane, I think most iOS developers, they know at least the name and the fact that today it's the most popular tool to automate all the little tasks around the deployment of an iOS app. And as you said, when you have a lot of tasks when you have a lot of apps dealing with the deployment task, well, it can be like a lot of work, and it's really like heavy lifting, kind of boring work, but that takes a lot of time.
Correct. Yeah. It's very tedious to keep releasing apps over and over again without automation, and so it's essentially like an integration tool that wraps a lot of other command line tools, APIs, and combines it into one localized interface for everyone to use, which makes maintaining hard, since it is an integration tool at heart. So we have to learn a lot of different aspects, from like Xcode build tool to the Apple APIs, to XC run, which has the simulator stuff in it. But it's super fun to maintain. And then it's even more fun to use because you don't have to actually know any of that. That's just kind of how it runs underneath the hood.
Yeah, and I would say that's like the trade-off of any good and useful tool is that it must like encapsulate some complexity. So by definition, a good tool, you're always going to have to deal with this sort of like expert edge cases with all the tools that Apple provides you and all the APIs from the platform where you want to send your binaries, etc. So what I've tried to do, I've tried to put a short definition of what Fastlane is for people who've never used it. So I'm going to say it, and you can tell me if I'm right or if there are some precision to make. So
All
I
right,
would
sounds
say,
good.
is it correct to describe Fastlane as a Ruby command line tool that comes pre-bundled with helper functions that can be called from a Ruby file to automate tasks about iOS deployments?
Yes, that is actually a really good explanation. It's also weirdly more than just a CLI tool as well. It is a Ruby dependency that you can run in your Ruby applications as well. So if you have like a Rails website that you want to do some API stuff with, it can also run in there. So it's a CLI tool. It's like a Ruby SDK, and then it's also like a DSL as well, where like we have like our own defined language inside of it, where you have like your platforms, actions, and all that kind of stuff, that you kind of have to learn as well. So it is kind of like this weird like triple mix of a CLI tool, a DSL, and an SDK.
And it's true that Ruby is also a very good language to define a DSL because of how dynamic it is. And so I've loaded in the streaming software a screenshot of a fast file. So I've taken it straight from, it's a screenshot from Fastlane official website. So we
Perfect.
can just take a look at it and we can explain it maybe to people a little bit like what this file does.
Yeah. So the lane, which is similar. So this is similar to a rake file or a make file, but it's very Fastlane and Ruby specific. So the lane is what you call from the CLI, and then inside the lane is where you would call your actions. So all of these are essentially just functions, but you don't necessarily need to pass parameters to them. So the first one increments the build number, and then it compiles the app and then uploads it to test flight. And the second one, then that lane is for doing App Store stuff. So the action names are pretty descriptive of what they do, at least in the example that you have. So then you can take screenshots, build app, upload to App Store, and then let everybody know on Slack that, hey, the build successfully went and I did zero work to do this.
And so I think what's super interesting also with this example of a fast file is that it really shows you like which are we could say the key use cases of Fastlane. So maybe if you should sum it up for people who've never used the tool, what can you achieve with Fastlane?
Oh my God, you can do so many
much,
things.
right?
Yeah. So the big tools that people use are compiling the app, which normally you'd have to do through Xcode. But the build app action, which right there ends up calling Xcode build, which is a command line tool, which it ends up doing a whole bunch of like some sort of pre-configurations for you to make things a little bit easier, so you don't have to actually know how the Xcode build CLI works. So that one is used pretty often. There is a tool called Scan, which runs your unit tests and UI tests. And you can choose which device you want to run those on. If you want to run them in all at the same time, retry if they fail. So that makes running UI tests and unit tests super easy. A tool that people love to use is Screenshot, which that one automatically takes screenshots of your app through your UI tests and can run them in English, French, and all other 70 languages if you need to across all different devices. So I'm sure we've all taken screenshots manually, and it is if you were doing all devices more than just English, it would take you a day, maybe 2 days, where you can have this done automatically in maybe half an hour at most. So that one is super useful if you do have like a bunch of screenshots, or if you need more than one localization. And then those screenshots can be uploaded automatically to the App Store with the Deliver tool, which can also do all the information too, like your descriptions, your what's new text, pretty much anything that the App Store Connect website does, Fastlane can do, and it can do it usually faster.
Yeah, and that's super interesting, this screenshot feature, because to be honest, like before I really started to take a look at Fastlane, in my mind, it was a tool to deal indeed with code signing and with uploading builds, but the screenshot part, I didn't think that it was part of it. And it's true that the way it's done is super clever because it's using the API that we have in the UI test, so to interact with the app, so to navigate to the right screen, maybe like populate some fields with the right data and that kind of stuff. And this way we can automate it. And yeah, as you're saying it, like as soon as you have like more than 2 or 3 languages, I mean the job of making the screenshot by hand, it's crazy.
Yeah. I actually don't get to use Screenshot a lot personally, since I don't have well, I just released 2 apps this past year, but I don't really have them localized, or yes, since I don't have a bunch of time. But once I get to that point, I'm actually looking forward to using it like a bit hardcore myself.
And maybe one question I had is that, so since Fastlane is a developer tool, right? It's not a graphical interface, so you can code with it and you can interact with it in a lot of ways. I was thinking, like, is there some really like either crazy or creative way that you've seen people using Fastlane?
Yeah, I mean, I've done quite a few, but one of the coolest parts about Fastlane is there was actually somebody who had issues seeing the screen and or was completely blind, and was able to interact with App Store Connect through this tool. So like App Store Connect actually wasn't very
accessible, I guess.
Yes at the time. And like we were the only way for this person to interact with it, and that felt super cool. So like that's a use case that I don't think like a lot of people think about, but because it is just text, that it's pretty straightforward for the most part, it was actually much easier to use. So like that's not, I wouldn't say a crazy feature, but like a super cool one.
Creative and useful, definitely.
Yeah. So that's probably one of my favorites. I actually had a person come to me that is a client of mine that does white labeled apps.
Yeah.
And he had 100 apps in both the App Store and Google Play. And for any small fixes, they were still doing it all by hand. So like the smallest bug fix would take multiple weeks to upload all those apps to both app stores. And we got it down to one Fastlane command and getting them all uploaded in like 3 or 4 hours, which that felt super cool. So like that's really the power that we provide
of
is
automation,
like, yeah. So it went, he saved 3 hours or 3 weeks of manual work down to one command line that took half a day.
Yeah. I think that's super interesting. I think like of course Fastlane is useful like in many cases, but when you are doing white label apps, it's even more because of course you're going to have the screenshots. But yeah, if you generate a lot of apps and you have to upload them yourself, it's like it's such a massive return on investment. Like it's a no-brainer basically to use Fastlane.
Oh yeah. For sure. I'm trying to think of any other crazy. I mean, there are a lot of people that use Fastlane for re-signing apps, which I don't necessarily understand how re-signing apps works, but it is kind of like the same white label kind of approach.
Yes.
Where you have, I guess, a thing that you need to redistribute over multiple accounts or something and re-sign. And we had this giant bash script for re-signing, and I don't like going into it because it's super scary. So I'm going to consider that a crazy use case.
Yeah.
Just because I don't understand it.
But yeah, I think the use case might be because I've been in this kind of situation where the client doesn't want like maybe to give the signing certificate to the developer, and so he resigns it on his own. And indeed, yeah, I've tried to do it once, and when you take a look at the documentation, that is almost non-existent. It's very low level bash, very scary, definitely.
Yeah, I don't necessarily like going in there, but that is, I think, some sort of crazy use case.
That it is.
And then trying to think of a few more. I mean, there are a lot of people that use just the App Store Connect API level stuff and do some like crazy cool things with that. Like there are some users who have a lot of in-app payments, like thousands of them in their apps, and they'll script out all of like the updating that, adding new IAPs, which would take forever if you were just doing stuff through App Store Connect directly. So like, I consider that crazy because I can't imagine an app having thousands of IAPs. My apps have 4, and I think that's terrifying. So that's kind of a fun use case as well.
Yeah, and super interesting because I wouldn't have thought about using Fastlane to automate things around App Store Connect, but it's true that it's a developer tool. There is an API, so you can automate and solve some real world issues.
Yeah.
We have an interesting question in the chat, and this can be a good question because I think it's something that can be a bit hard to correctly position Fastlane. So Sassy is asking why using Fastlane if there is tools like Circle CI or App Center.
So Circle CI actually installs our gem on every machine they have. So they actually use it under the hood themselves. So like Fastlane isn't necessarily it's not a CI service. And I don't even know if I would consider it like a CI. I mean, it is a continuous integration, continuous development tool because it does aid in that, but it doesn't really fill the same gap as what Circle CI does,
Yeah,
App Center,
definitely agree.
um,
Definitely.
all the actual like services that automatically run stuff for you. But a lot of those CI services actually do install our gem and run things directly. So I know GitHub Actions has our gem installed. Circle CI does.
Bitwise also, I
What?
think.
Who's that?
Bitwise.
Yep. And they actually have some of their like uh, Bitrise actions. I don't know what they're called. Steps are actually, I think, wrappers around our tool as well.
Yeah,
So it kind of empowers a lot of other things.
and it shows you also that Fastlane is definitely like the industry standard tool that then all of these CI SAS platforms are going to integrate under the hood.
Yeah, correct. So it's it is in it's in a very weird space because like we don't have our own necessarily CI service because that's because other people can do that better for us and around us.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And App Center, if I'm right, App Center it's a platform to upload builds. So once again, it's another part of the
Yeah.
workflow.
Yeah, I haven't used a ton of App Center. I think they also do have
Some
some
some tools
like
kind of like Firebase, I think, also.
yeah. I should probably end up playing with that one of these days, just so that I'm a little bit more informed.
But I can say like the way that I've used App Center is that I've used it only as a tool to host development builds, and the workflow
Oh,
was that Fastlane was building the app and then uploading the build
that's right.
to App Center. So that's how they were
App
like
Center took
integrated with.
over Hockey app, right?
Exactly. Microsoft
Yes,
bought
yeah,
them,
okay.
and then yeah.
Yeah. I remember I used Hockey a lot, and we have a Hockey action that does upload, or well, did upload
Upload to
builds
GitHub.
that no longer exists. But Microsoft actually maintains a Fastlane plugin for App Center themselves now,
That makes
where
sense.
Fastlane had a Hockey app action built into it, and then us maintainers had to maintain that when things changed. But we have a plugin architecture where, like, for that use case, they maintain everything. So when stuff on their end needs like updating, they can handle it, and it actually works out super well.
Perfect. Perfect. So great question, Sassy. And there was another interesting question. So this one is more technical, so I guess it's more suited for you than for me. So Chio Black Plum is asking, is there a rerun for failed exit test feature available out of the box or through one of the available plugins?
So
I guess it's for flexi test.
I've never seen OOTB said before, so that's kind of new.
Yeah.
I like that out of the box. So there in I believe the most recent version of Fastlane that we released, there is a rerun that is now built in by default. I don't remember like on what level of a retry it is. But there is a Fastlane plugin called Test Center, which one of our core contributors maintains that does a lot more around doing testing stuff with a lot of retries, failures. I don't use a lot of that myself, so I don't necessarily know on to like what extent it does all the things, but it is really well maintained. So if you do have like some flaky tests and need to get retried a few times, or need to do something weird, I would go check that one out. I think I linked that to you in our notes. Maybe we can put that in the description
Yeah,
of this
if
talk
it's not there, we will
afterwards.
put it afterwards. But indeed, and good thing to say that there are some links in the description. Most of the things that we are mentioning, they are in the description, so you can go check them out if you want to find more information on the topics. Okay, so that was also a great questions, and there was also this one from Leo. So he's asking, have you looked into GitHub Actions and how to incorporate them into a Fastlane workflow?
Yes. So GitHub Action. So pretty much almost any CI will work with Fastlane fairly easily without a lot of changes. The only things that get weird when changing between your different CI providers is how your env vars get set, and then how you would hook up to your match repository to sync your certificates and profiles. Um, that's really where things differ a lot. So with GitHub Actions, you have to enter your env vars through the settings for your project, and then in your workflow file, you have to like do this like setting of variables from these settings. I'm not explaining it great, but I do actually have a GitHub plugin that I wrote that does a lot of GitHub Action Fastlane automation for you. So it will actually sync your env vars and generate a Fastlane workflow file for you, and then also add in the SSH deploy keys so that your Fastlane repo can actually talk to your match repo and pull down those certs. So going into that, I guess I do have a blog post on joshholtz.com that actually talks about this a lot in more detail. And then that links to my Fastlane plugin that does a lot of this. So we can put those in the show notes as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But at a more high level, as long as you like aren't doing anything really weird, it's really easy to take your tool or your application and move it between GitHub Actions, Circle CI, Bitrise. Everything will work the exact same.
Yeah, I can tell you that on my end, I've been using more GitLab than GitHub.
Okay.
But same thing, like for the environment variables, we had to position them indeed in the settings of the repo. But besides that, like when we went from that to Bitrise, not that many things to change.
Perfect. Love to hear it.
And finally, we had more feedback than a question. So from Shubham, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, saying that for him, one of the best use case is code
Mm.
signing because it used to improve the developer experience a lot when onboarding a new developer or when developers are changing their development machines.
Yes. Yeah. Match is a super cool tool. So I guess to explain that, what what that does is that is an encrypted repository um, that has your certs and profiles in them. Um, and what Fastlane allows you to do is it will create certs, store them in there encrypted, and then on any machine you can pull those down and install them. So we don't have to worry about revoking and recreating on all the machines that you go to. You don't have to manually export from your keychain and send that over via email or another insecure form and install. It makes almost dealing with certs like zero work, which is super nice. Like I have 3 machines that I normally use, and I never run into any cert issues anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
Now I probably will since I said that, but
But I agree, it's super useful, and Xcode has gotten better like over the last years in the code signing department. But at the beginning of iOS, it was really really bad, and like the added value was even like more evident and more valuable, I would say.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so we had now another part in the script for this episode, which was more about getting started with Fastlane. And actually, we had one of the questions that I think is something that maybe we want to go a little bit into because someone was asking, about how do you position Fastlane with a CI tool. And so, as you
Hmm.
said, Josh, Fastlane is not a CI tool. So, for instance, Fastlane is something that you can install on your development machine and already start using on a development machine.
Yeah. So yeah, it's It's wait, can we can you ask that again?
Yeah, I was saying that you absolutely don't need to use something like GitHub Actions or
Oh, correct.
Bitwise or anything like this to use Fastlane. You can just download it on your Mac and start using it.
Yeah. That's kind of the best part because it doesn't require much of like any CI debugging for the most part because it's gonna run close enough to the same on your Mac as it does on your second Mac or on a CI. The interface for executing it is the exact same. So that's kind of one of the best parts about you aren't like manually running shell scripts. There's a lot of smart things within the tool itself that will allow it to adapt from a CI to your own machine to wherever it wants to run.
Yeah, I think what's really great about it is that if you want to maybe like give it a try, you don't need to commit yourself to like buying a
Mhm.
trial from a service or anything like that. It's just something you install. You can try it, create maybe a small fast file to deal with the use case that is the most useful for your app. So maybe like try out the screenshots, for instance, and you can already like get a feel for the tool and if you think it will help you or not. But I guess it will help you.
Yeah. I mean, um, starting with the tool itself, like that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is probably installing Ruby the correct way,
That's right. On
which
macOS, definitely.
which has gotten a little bit better now that the latest Mac OS does have Ruby 2.6. For a while, it was running Ruby 2.1, which was outdated, and that was a whole headache. But going into the future, I do want to add more in the docs about how to prep your machine for installing the tool, because installing Ruby is probably the hardest thing about starting it yourself. But we do have different ways to install, so you can install directly in on the Ruby version that your OS provides. It's not recommended. We do offer a brew install as well tool, a brew install as well, which actually does work pretty well these days. But the recommended version is to install Ruby through like RBENV or ASDF or Ruby install. Um, but besides that, the onboarding should be pretty easy.
Pretty easy. Yeah. And then if you are, so let's say like someone already has a project, an app, and they want to integrate Fastlane with it. Maybe like which feature of Fastlane should they try first? Which one would you recommend?
So Fastlane actually does have some templates that it can generate for you.
Oh, that's interesting.
When you, yeah. If you run, I think it's Fastlane init, you get presented with four options. I think three are that actually do stuff. The fourth one is just a blank fast file. But it will create the lanes for you for uploading to test flight and all the things involved. One for the App Store. I think there's an init for just doing like tests or screenshots. Um, and it is really hard to say which one is best to do. One of the ones that will probably work best out of the box is probably Scan to test to run your unit tests or UI tests, because there's not anything really involved there with signing or generating screenshots. Generating screenshots is probably the most fun. And then building the app through Gym is probably also a good one to start off with. That one can get a little bit frustrating if you don't have things set up for signing uh, the most correct way. That one can get a little get a little bit of have a little bit of frustration if you are using automatic code signing or you have your manual code signing stuff messed up a little bit. But it really depends on what you want to get out of it, which is so. I mean, like I always build apps. I don't do a lot of unit tests in my personal apps. Don't judge me. So I don't really ever use Scan personally. I mainly build the app, do match to do certs, profiles, things like that. And I usually use Pilot to upload the app to test flight and distribute to my different groups.
Yeah, and it's super interesting that you mentioned this onboarding feature in Fastlane because I was not aware that Fastlane could generate this template. And yeah, definitely like a great way to ease the integration of the tool. So if I take a look at the agenda, so there was a part about the screenshot feature, but we've covered it. So I had another part about two-factor authentication because something
Oof.
changed so recently for Apple developer is that I think since early March, Apple has started enforcing that all Apple developer account must use two-factor implementation. So it's this. It's this system where when you want to access your developer account, you get a pop-up on another device that shows you a little OTP, so one-time password, and then you need to input in the computer that try to connect to the account. So does this like makes it harder for Fastlane to work with App Store Connect?
Yes, it does, and also doesn't at the same time. Um, so I guess to step back a little bit on like why this is a thing in Fastlane is Fastlane historically has used Apple's, we're gonna go with private APIs to interact with App Store Connect and the developer site. Um, and so when you're using those private APIs, you have to deal with like the same authentication that the web uses, which in that case is your Apple ID email. And if you have 2FA, then we have to deal with that. Historically, you didn't have to, you weren't forced to use 2FA, which made Fastlane a little bit easier because you could create a separate Apple ID for it that you don't enable 2FA. Um, if you enable 2FA, then there's an extra step in there, like you said, where Fastlane actually will prompt you for the one-time code. Um, but your session only lasts 15 days, 30 days. I don't know exactly how often those change now. So you'd have to re-enter that every single time. And it's not terrible if you're running on your local machine because you're there, hopefully with the phone that's connected to your account, or iPad or whatever it is. But on a CI, that doesn't necessarily work. So this was fine because your CI account usually wouldn't have 2FA enabled. But there's been this 2FA that's now forced, which makes CI almost unusable with an Apple ID. There are weird ways to get around it. But luckily, Apple introduced the App Store Connect API in 2018. Um, Fastlane started using it in the spring of 2019 in the pilot tool, which uploads to test flight. We did it in that one first because those private APIs were taken down. So we're a little bit forced, but it was good because I kind of got the ball started on the rest of it. And in this summer is actually when App Store Connect API was integrated mostly into Fastlane, most parts, because at DubDub this year, um, a lot more APIs were introduced. So Match, Sci, and Cert can all use that API now. Deliver uses the API now for uploading screenshots, doing metadata. And then the only thing that we're really missing is with App Store Connect API. Are some of the more specific things, I think, like a lot of with like app creation in developer portal and all the capabilities and stuff. Some of that stuff isn't there yet. And in-app payment stuff isn't there yet. So two-factor auth, going back to this, it is not great that it was forced from a Fastlane standpoint. Great that it was forced from a security standpoint. Like, I get why it's done. It does make things harder, but it was also good because it started to force a lot of Fastlane users to adopt the App Store Connect API key, which is a much better approach because we're actually using public APIs that have spec, that have docs, that won't just change without us knowing. So it is good, bad, good that 2FA is now forced.
Yeah, so if I get it correctly, so when you are a Fastlane user, now you need to provide this, you need to get this API key from the dev portal
Correct.
and set it somewhere, either I guess in your environment variables or something like this.
Yeah. There's different ways to set it. You can put them in. So there's three different parts of an API key. There's the issuer ID. There's the I think it's the ID for the key, and then the actual like private key part. There's three env vars that you can put them in. Or we created a format that's a JSON file that just kind of combines them.
Okay.
That you can throw in as well. I wouldn't suggest committing those to
Yeah,
your
that makes sense.
repository because security.
Yeah.
But it is a pretty quick transition to migrate your existing code over to use this. I A lot of reports that I've gotten, it was been like a 15-minute change, maybe half hour. It won't work though for everyone, because there are some tools that don't respect the App Store Connect API key yet because those APIs don't exist. So like downloading the DSYMs from App Store Connect, there's no API for that yet. So you still have to use your Apple ID, which does ruin some CIs that people have set up.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I get it. But it's great to know that Fastlane does have the mean to deal with this change on Apple's end. And so we have a great question in the chat because it's a very good transition to another section for this interview. So it's the roadmap section. So let's me display it and then I will display the comment. So Shubham is asking, how do you think about new feature, I guess, at Fastlane? I mean, now Fastlane has plenty of features. So apart from finding edge cases in existing functions, how do you guys cop out new things?
Yes, that is a great question. In probably like the past year or so, there hasn't been like a ton of additions, like new big features. Um, Mainly because we did introduce the Fastlane plugins a few years ago, and
Okay.
Fastlane plugins allows for a lot more customizability without Fastlane and Fastlane maintainers maintaining more integrations. So that has pulled a lot of new features out away from us because historically the new features were new actions, which were new services.
Yeah.
um, and it doesn't make sense for Fastlane maintainers to always maintain that because that does slow down releases, and things like that. So a lot of the new features are more around like what Apple develops or Google might develop, that Fastlane has to start adding in, or if there are more like cross-platform tools that come out, we do want to start adding either more support or more doc for those. But going into like a 2020 roadmap, um, Ruby 3.0 support is something that we're working on.
I think I have a
There we
screenshot
go.
for it.
So perfect. So Ruby 3.0, it was new. It was dropped on Christmas, like every new Ruby version is. Um, and it is a pretty big change. So that one is slowly getting worked out. We will be dropping support for Ruby 2.4 when Ruby 3.0 is out. Ruby 2.4 is no longer maintained, supported. And a lot of our Fastlane dependencies are bumping their minimum to 2.5. So we kind of have to, or kind of want to stay with that. For more features, definitely App Store Connect APIs as they roll out. Generally, they'll roll out around June dub time ish. So we can probably expect to see a bunch more new APIs released then. Which that new App Store Connect API, and other Xcode features that may pop up. I do kind of block off like 3 months of feature development of the year for that, because that usually does take a decent amount of time. And then I guess I don't know if this is a feature, but kind of regrow the core contributor team. Fastlane has been around for 5 years, so our core contributor team has seen people get added to it, get removed as they tend to move away from doing iOS development into something else. So I'm trying to regrow the core contributor team to both improve the time it takes to solve issues, merge PRs. And what I also want to do is improve the docs a lot. I feel like when most people think of features, docs might not be a feature. But I think having better docs, I want to add dark mode because it doesn't have dark mode yet, and that bugs me. But there's, I think, a lot we can do to docs that will actually improve Fastlane more than what new features would actually improve Fastlane. And then just like generally improve code quality and consistency. It is a large project. There are a lot of people contributing to it. I want to make sure that like the code quality stays up to what kind of we want it to. And Fastlane is more than just the Fastlane core tool itself. There are other tools that Fastlane maintains outside of just that gem. So there we do have a GitHub org that is a Fastlane community org, which does have 15 plus Fastlane plugins, gems that we also maintain. So those are probably where more features will get added to those, because those are things that are pretty specific to other implementations of things that people use. So in terms of new features getting added to Fastlane itself, it's probably relatively small and in terms of what features get added. Things that are probably more specific to like certain use cases. But that's not saying that we won't think of something. But it is a pretty mature tool at this point. So there's not going to be like a ton of new features that were added as they were back in version 0, version 1.
Yeah, it makes a total sense. Like you were saying, it's a mature tool with lots of features, and now the challenge is both keeping up with the ecosystem, we could say, and then the focus on the documentation. It makes sense because if you want people to adopt Fastlane, I mean, documentation is more important than new feature at that point. So I totally agree, and it makes total sense for it to be like so important on the roadmap.
Mhm.
There was a very interesting question about the roadmap. So Leo is asking, given that Fastlane now supports Android, is there something that has caught your eyes about the workflow on Android and that would make sense to also be available on iOS?
Let's see. Given that Fastlane supports Android now, what has caught your eye about their workflow? Oh, I think that's a great question. I mean, I don't do a ton of Android development
Same here.
personally myself right now, but I feel like the Android tools of Fastlane and the iOS are close to equal. Um, Not necessarily equal in size and priority of where development goes to, but I think that's because there is more that needs to get automated around uh, the iOS ecosystem than Android, especially since Android has Gradle, and Gradle has a lot of plugins and stuff that do
That makes
like
sense.
automation. There's not a lot of signing issues that happen. Um, One thing that like the Android ecosystem maybe could use is doing on is I mean more like Google Play integration, where we have like the Spaceship API that does a lot of App Store Connect API. We could maybe add something more on the Android side. But Fastlane does use Google's Ruby SDK to do Google Play Talk. So that's something that people could use. I guess I don't know. It's a question I'm probably going to have to think about a little more.
Yeah, I guess it's
Um,
a
or
very open-ended
or
question.
yeah, or hear opinions from people that are part of those communities. Just because I'm not necessarily an expert in knowing what both need or what one of those needs more.
Exactly. And it's a great remark given that the last part of this interview is about contributing to Fastlane. But
Yes.
just before we move on to this part, one feedback so from iJazz, who is saying that he is very glad to hear the ongoing focus on docs because he thinks that the docs are already better than most other projects out there.
That's fantastic to hear. I feel like docs is always a hard thing to focus on because you're not providing like direct value like a new feature at least that's not what it feels like when you're maintaining it. It's more something that like you kind of feel over time.
Yes.
Um, and I feel like a lot of my time lately has been more on the actual like Fastlane code base itself. So I really want to like personally focus on docs more this year, to make sure that like it is kind of feeling more like other docs in terms of like how it's organized, how you search for things, um, and making sure that everything that Fastlane can offer is in the docs, even if it is like the docs do link to the code somewhere. Nobody should have to go into the code repo to see any sort of information that they're looking for. Um, at least not from a high level. So
Yeah.
I want to make sure that everything is in the docs no matter what.
Yeah, and what you say about, I mean, good dogs, they ease the access to the tool, and that makes sense. Like maybe an analogy to make, like if you're on Amazon and what you want is available, but on one hand it's going to take 1 month to arrive, and on the other hand you have it the next day. Well, when it's there the next day, it's easier for you to buy it, and if you have good dogs, it's easier for you to try out the tool because it's going to be easier to get
Exactly.
started.
Exactly that. Yeah, I agree.
And so let's go to the last section of the interview, the part about contributing, because Fastlane is indeed an open source tool. You said it yourself that you started contributing to it at some point. So if people are interested in contributing to Fastlane, how should they go about it?
Yes. So we do have a contributing markdown file, I believe, is what
And I
that one is
think it is in
called
the
in the
screenshots.
repository.
So it's very
Yes.
small. Sorry, it's a big file. But there is the
Yes.
link
So this
in the description.
yeah. So this one kind of explains like how kind of how we work within Fastlane. Check out the docs to make sure like uh things are I get wait before submitting. Oh yeah, make sure docs, make sure everything is like the thing you want to add isn't already there. This kind of explains to start working on it, you go to your first pr.md, which is another markdown file. But what this also explains is that you will need a Google account to sign the CLA when you make your first PR, which does feel a little bit weird, but Fastlane is a Google owned product. Google does support the development of this tool. And in order to contribute to it, you do need to sign their CLA. It's nothing terrifying, but you do have to have an account to create your first PR. So that's one thing to know about before you contribute. But a lot of it is then in that your first pr.md, if you're able to pull that one up as well. This one kind of
Yes.
explains how you go about creating your first PR, running tests, things like that. It does look a little terrifying at first because Fastlane is also a big project, but you really shouldn't be terrified to make your first PR. We're a pretty helpful community. Nothing toxic ever happens at all. We're all in this to help each other out and to make the iOS mobile, I guess, just mobile ecosystem a lot easier to use. So I review every PR that goes out, and if you do want help in a PR and you're not sure if it's ready to merge, still create the PR. I'll comment on it, help you out, add commits if you need to. I want to make sure that you're having fun contributing and learning as you contribute. So I guess I probably want to add into this doc somewhere, like, don't be scared, because we've all had to create our first contribute at some point. It shouldn't be an intimidating process.
Yeah, and as you said, things are like written down, so there are some steps. You're not getting into the unknown, and the links are in the description if you want to see the content of the file that we've just shown. All right, so that was the last section of the interview itself. Now it's part for a very important part, which is the promo part of the episode. So we have some projects to promote. You have some projects to promote. So first, I wanted to remind you that Josh is on Twitter. So this is a screenshot of his Twitter account. And if you want to have good information about Fastlane, well, of course, go follow him. There is also a Twitter account for Fastlane Tools that you can go and follow. And then Josh, you sent me the links to two projects you wanted to speak about. So the first one, it's Indie Dev Monday. So I'm going to let you tell us about it.
Yeah, so this is a newsletter I accidentally started last July. Um, I have recently gotten into the indie development community. Beginning of last year, kind of followed a whole bunch of people like Charlie Chapman, who does Dark Noise, Christian, which does Apollo, and there's a bunch other, but those are the main two that actually are the reason I started this newsletter. There was a Monday I think it was June, where they were both doing some big event. It was Christian's birthday, and Charlie was announcing Dark Noise 2.0, and like my Twitter feed was just full of indie dev goodness that day. And that was a Monday, which is where this name came from. And it was a great way to start the week because there was just so much like positivity and like good things going on. I wanted to kind of continue that. So I was like, that'd be great if that was an actual thing. And I was like, well, I guess I could make that a thing. So the next Monday, I got the first issue released, and it's a newsletter that features one or two indie developers each day, and it's like an interview style newsletter where I ask like some questions that are same for each guest, and then something that's more specific to the apps that they do or the podcast that they host. I'm 36 issues in, which I didn't actually think I'm not really great at continuing things.
That's a lot
So that
already.
was kind of fun. Yeah, yeah, it is. So it feels good to actually like still be on this. And it's a pretty easy read newsletter. And yeah, it's really there for kind of supporting the devs and getting their apps and who they are out, so that they can grow their apps more.
I think that's super interesting. This focus on indie dev. So if you want to know about the activity, what's happening in the indie dev scene, well, you have the link in the description, and you can go subscribe to this newsletter. And the second project you wanted to promote, so actually, I had also heard about this project. I think it was in December's iOS Dev Happy Hour.
Mm-hmm.
So it's called Underdog Devs.
Yes, so Underdog Dev helps the formerly incarcerated kind of transition into the software industry. And I am not like super involved in this, but I do think it's a really great group to get behind. And they're throwing a whole event this month. There's a lot of I think it's called Spring into Swift, I think is what the event is called. And there's a lot of talks from a lot of important iOS community people that are kind of supporting this. So I think Paul Hudson was the first one to talk earlier today or right now. I think he was like 2 hours ago. But I'll be doing a Fastlane talk at the end of the month for this. I think it's just a really cool group that kind of helps bridge that gap into the iOS community or just engineering community. Since it is a great industry that is pretty accepting of people, and it kind of just helps people get in that door.
Yeah, I think it's a super nice initiative. So if you are interested or if you just want to support this project, I guess checking out their Twitter, following them, that's already a great first step to encourage the people who are behind the project. And as just said, there are some talks by some very talented people from the community. So you have everything to gain by checking them out. And to conclude the promo part, for my end, I'm going to be very quick. Just remind you that if you're there, you are somehow on my YouTube channel and you can do some nice things on it. You can like this video, but you can also subscribe if you want to stay tuned for more content. I have some pretty exciting content coming up later this month. It could be very possible that next week my guest will be someone related to the landscape of newsletters in iOS. Not going to say more, but it can give some idea for
Oh,
some people. So there's going to
right.
be some exciting content this month, and I think today was also a very exciting content. We got to speak about a tool that is super interesting, and I can tell you I've been doing iOS for 10 years, and I have learned stuff this evening. So I think it has been also the same on the audience side. So thank you, Josh, for being with me and for
Thanks for
answering
having
my
me.
questions.
I'm glad my connection actually seemed to improve over the stream.
It improved during the live. Yeah. Now
Oh,
the gods
I
of
was
internet were with
I was
us.
so scared. I was so scared.
I mean, it's the advantage of doing live that we get a lot of interactivity, but sometimes we also get a little bit scared before we started.
Yes.
But everything turned out fine, which is the most important. So before we end, just wanted to say thank you, Josh. Thank you, everyone, for attending and for asking questions. If you enjoyed this live, a replay will be available very short, so you can share it with your friends and colleagues.
Perfect. Thanks again.
Thank you all. Have a great evening or great rest of the day, depending on where you are in the world. Bye bye.
All right, bye.